Some secrets are buried deep beneath the Arizona soil, and some men will kill to keep them there forever. The nightmare always started the same way. A gunshot echoing across the darkness, the smell of gunpowder thick in the cold night air, and his father's voice weak and fading, calling his name from the shadows near the barn. Colter Hayes jolted awake, his chest heaving, sweat dampening the rough cotton sheets. The first light of dawn was creeping through the window of his small cabin, painting the worn wooden walls in shades of amber and gold. He sat up slowly, running his hands through his dark hair, trying to shake the images from his mind. 3 years. It had been 3 years since that night. 3 years since he found his father bleeding out in the dirt, clutching at his chest, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. 3 years since James Hayes died without telling his son who pulled the trigger or why. Colter pushed himself out of bed and walked to the basin near the window. He splashed cold water on his face, letting it run down his neck and chest. Outside, the Arizona Territory was waking up. Red Mesa Ranch stretched before him in every direction, 350 acres of high desert grassland, bordered by red rock formations that glowed like fire when the sun hit them just right. This land had been in his family for 20 years. His father had built everything from nothing. The cabin, the barn, the fences that ran for miles across the property, and now it all belonged to Colter, a legacy paid for in blood and mystery. He dressed quickly, pulling on worn denim pants, a faded blue work shirt, and his father's old leather vest. The vest still smelled faintly of tobacco and saddle soap. Colter buckled his belt, grabbed his hat from the peg near the door, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The work never stopped on a ranch. 50 head of cattle needed feeding. 8 horses needed tending. Fences needed checking. Water troughs needed filling. It was honest work, hard work, the kind that made a man's back ache and his hands callous. But it was lonely work, too. Colter moved through his morning routine with the precision of habit. He carried hay to the cattle pen, watching the brown and white steers jostle each other for position at the feeding trough. He checked the hooves of his favorite horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Dusty, running his hands along the animal's legs to feel for any swelling or heat. Dusty nickered softly and nudged Colter's shoulder with his nose. The horse had been with him since before his father died, a constant presence in a world that had become too quiet, too empty. "Morning, old friend," Colter murmured, scratching behind the horse's ears. "Just you and me again." He filled the water troughs from the well, working the pump handle until his shoulders burned. The physical labor was good. It kept his mind occupied, kept him from dwelling on the questions that haunted him. Who killed James Hayes? And why the sheriff had investigated, of course. But there were no witnesses, no evidence, no suspects, just a body in the dirt and a son left with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. By mid-morning, Colter was repairing a section of fence on the north side of the property when he heard hoofbeats approaching. He looked up, squinting against the sun, and saw a rider coming fast across the grassland. Too fast. The horse was running, full out, ears pinned back, mane flying, and the rider was struggling to hold on. Colter dropped his tools and ran for Dusty. He swung into the saddle without bothering with the stirrups, turning the buckskin toward the approaching rider. His heart was pounding as he urged Dusty into a gallop. The runaway horse was an Appaloosa, a beautiful spotted mare with a white blaze down her face, but she was terrified, running blind, her eyes rolling white. The rider was a woman, dark hair whipping behind her, her hands clutching desperately at the reins. Colter leaned low over Dusty's neck, pushing the gelding faster. They closed the distance in seconds. He came alongside the Appaloosa, reaching out to grab the mare's bridle. His fingers closed around leather, and he pulled, using his weight and Dusty's momentum to slow the panicked animal. "Whoa, girl, whoa!" His voice was calm, steady, even though his pulse was racing. The Appaloosa responded to the tone, to the firm hand on her bridle. She slowed from a gallop to a canter, then to a trot, and finally to a trembling walk. Coulter kept his grip on her bridle, talking to her in a low, soothing voice until she stopped completely. The rider was breathing hard, her face flushed. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones and copper-colored skin that spoke of Apache heritage. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, currently wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She wore a traditional Apache dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and her long black hair was tied back with a red cloth. "Are you hurt?" Coulter asked, his voice rough from adrenaline. She shook her head, still trying to catch her breath. "I'm fine, thank you. A rattlesnake spooked Storm. I couldn't control her." Coulter nodded, running his hand down the Appaloosa's neck. The mare was still trembling, her coat dark with sweat. "Horses and snakes don't mix. You were lucky she didn't throw you." "Lucky you were here," the woman said. She managed a small smile. "I'm Aita Riverhawk." The name meant nothing to Coulter, but there was something in the way she said it, as if she expected him to recognize it. He studied her face, trying to place her, but came up empty. "Coulter Hayes," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "My ranch starts just over that rise." Aita's expression changed. The relief faded, replaced by something more complex. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Her dark eyes studied his face with sudden intensity. "Coulter Hayes," she repeated slowly, "son of James Hayes." Now it was Coulter's turn to be surprised. His hand tightened on the Appaloosa's bridle. "You knew my father." "No," Aita said, "but my grandfather did, Red Sky Walker. He speaks of your father often, says he was a good man." Coulter felt something cold settle in his chest. Red Sky Walker. He knew the name, a respected elder among the White Mountain Apache, known for his wisdom and his knowledge of the old ways. But why would he speak of James Hayes? "My father had many friends," Coulter said carefully. "I didn't know your grandfather was among them." Aita studied him for a long moment, as if weighing her next words. Then she said very quietly, "My grandfather also says your father died because of a secret." A secret about this land. The world seemed to tilt beneath Coulter's feet. He stared at Aita, his throat suddenly dry. "What do you know about my father's death?" "Not much," she admitted. "But I've been trying to learn. I'm a writer. I've been investigating for 6 months, following rumors and old stories. And everything I've found points back here, to Red Mesa Ranch." Coulter's mind was racing. For 3 years he had lived with the weight of not knowing. 3 years of wondering if he would ever find the truth. And now this woman, this stranger, appeared out of nowhere with answers, or at least the promise of answers. "Come up to the house," he said abruptly. "Storm needs water and rest, and I need to hear what you know." Aita nodded. Together they rode slowly back toward the ranch buildings. Coulter led Storm to the barn, checking her legs for injuries while Aita watched. The mare had a small scrape on her right foreleg. Nothing serious. Coulter cleaned it gently and applied some salve from a jar on the shelf. "You're good with horses," Aita observed. "My father taught me," Coulter replied. "He said horses can tell what kind of man you are by how you treat them." He finished with Storm and led her into an empty stall with fresh hay and water. Then he turned to Aita. "The house is this way." The cabin was small and neat, just one main room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a rough wooden table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Coulter poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher and handed one to Aita. She drank gratefully, then looked around the cabin with curious eyes. It was clean but sparse. No decorations, no personal touches, just the bare necessities of living. "You live alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Been that way since my father died," Coulter confirmed. He sat down at the table, gesturing for her to do the same. "Now tell me what you know. Why do you think someone killed him over a secret?" Aita reached into a leather satchel at her side and pulled out a worn notebook. She opened it to a page covered in neat handwriting and crude maps. "For the past 6 months I've been researching the history of this area, talking to elders, reading old records, and I kept hearing the same story, about a silver mine." Silver mine, Coulter frowned. There are dozens of old mines scattered across Arizona. Not like this one, Aida said. She pointed to her map. This mine dates back to the 1860s. It was discovered by prospectors who were working Apache land, but the mine was never registered, never claimed officially. It just disappeared from the records. She looked up at him, her dark eyes intense. My grandfather says the mine is under this mesa, under your land, and he says your father discovered it 3 years ago. Coulter felt his pulse quicken. He had never heard his father mention anything about a silver mine. But then James Hayes had been a quiet man, not given to sharing his thoughts freely. If he had discovered something valuable on his own land, he might have kept it to himself. Even if that's true, Coulter said slowly, why would someone kill him for it? The land is ours. Any mine on it would be ours too. Unless someone else wanted it, Aida replied. She flipped to another page in her notebook. There's a man in Pine Valley named Silas Drummond. He owns several mines in the territory, and according to my research, he's been trying to buy Red Mesa Ranch for years. Your father always refused to sell. The name hit Coulter like a physical blow. Silas Drummond. He knew the man. Everyone in the territory knew Silas Drummond. He was rich, powerful, and ruthless. A man who got what he wanted one way or another. Could Drummond have killed James Hayes to get his land, to get to a hidden silver mine? You think Drummond murdered my father? Coulter said. It wasn't a question, but Aida nodded anyway. I think someone did, and Drummond had the most to gain. Coulter stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. His hands were shaking slightly. After 3 years of living in the dark, suddenly there was light. A name, a reason, a direction to point his anger and his grief. But Aida's voice cut through his thoughts, gentle but firm. I know what you're thinking, but we can't just accuse him. We need proof, evidence. And do you have any? Coulter asked, turning to face her. Not yet, she admitted, but I know where to start looking. Before Coulter could respond, the cabin door opened and a young man stepped inside. He was tall and lanky with sandy hair and an easy smile that faltered when he saw Aida sitting at the table. Boss, I didn't know you had company, the man said, his eyes darting between Coulter and the Apache woman. I can come back later if you want. It's fine, Ben, Coulter said. This was Ben Carter, his only hired hand and closest thing he had to a friend. This is Aida Riverhawk. She's helping me with something. Ben's eyebrows rose, but he had the good sense not to ask questions. Well, I'll just be checking on the south fence then. Let you two talk. He backed out of the cabin, closing the door behind him with exaggerated care. When he was gone, Aida allowed herself a small smile. Your friend seems easily surprised. Ben's a good man, Coulter said, just not used to seeing visitors out here, especially not... He trailed off, suddenly aware of how the words might sound. Especially not Apache women, Aida finished for him, but there was no anger in her voice, just a weary understanding. I'm used to it. Coulter felt a flush of shame. He sat back down at the table. I'm sorry, that was thoughtless. You didn't say anything wrong, Aida replied. She closed her notebook and looked at him directly. But I need to know something, Coulter Hayes. If we find proof that Silas Drummond killed your father, what will you do? It was a fair question. Coulter considered it carefully. Part of him wanted to say he would ride into town and put a bullet in Drummond's heart. That was the frontier way. An eye for an eye. Justice delivered with gunpowder and lead. But another part of him, the part that remembered his father's teachings about honor and law, knew that wasn't the right answer. I'll do whatever the law requires, he said finally. I'll bring him to justice, the proper way. Aida studied his face as if searching for the truth behind his words. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. Good. Because my grandfather taught me that revenge is a poison. It destroys the one who drinks it as surely as the one it's meant for. She stood up, smoothing her dress. I should go. My aunt will be worried. I'm staying with her in Pine Valley while I do my research." "When will I see you again?" Coulter asked, surprised by how much he wanted to know the answer. "Tomorrow," Aita said. "I'll come back tomorrow and we can talk more. There's much I haven't told you yet." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Do you know what my name means in Apache, Aita?" Coulter shook his head. "First to dance," she said softly. "My mother gave it to me because I was always moving, always seeking, never content to sit still. She said I would dance through life searching for truth." "And what truth are you searching for now?" Coulter asked. Aita's expression grew serious. "The same truth you are. Who killed your father, and why?" She left then, collecting Storm from the barn and riding away across the grassland at a much more controlled pace. Coulter stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching her go, feeling as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. For 3 years he had been alone with his grief and his questions. For 3 years he had lived half a life, going through the motions, waiting for something he couldn't name. And now, in the space of an hour, everything had changed. He had a name, Silas Drummond. He had a reason, a hidden silver mine. And he had an ally, a dark-eyed Apache woman who seemed to see right through him. Coulter turned back into his cabin and walked to the fireplace. On the mantel sat a framed photograph of his father, one of the few possessions he truly treasured. James Hayes stared out from the photograph, his face weathered and strong, his eyes kind. "I'm going to find out what happened, Pa," Coulter said quietly. "I promise you that, whatever it takes." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the cabin in golden shadow, Coulter sat down at the table and tried to remember everything his father had told him in those final moments. The old man had been dying, blood spreading across his chest, his breath coming in wet gasps. But he had said something about a map, something about being careful. Coulter had always assumed his father was delirious, speaking nonsense as death approached. But now, with Aita's words echoing in his mind, he wondered if there had been meaning in those final words after all. A map. His father had mentioned a map. Coulter stood up and began searching the cabin with new purpose. He looked in drawers and cabinets, behind books and under floorboards, but he found nothing. No map, no hidden documents, nothing that might explain the mystery. Frustrated, he sat down on his bed and stared at the fireplace. Where would his father have hidden something important? Where would he have put something he wanted to keep safe? And then, like a whisper from the past, he remembered his mother. Elena Hayes had died when Coulter was 12 years old, taken by fever in the space of a week. She had been a gentle woman, always humming to herself as she worked, and her favorite place in the whole cabin had been the chair by the fireplace. She would sit there every evening mending clothes or knitting, while James read aloud from whatever book he could get his hands on. It was where she felt safe, where she felt home. Coulter walked slowly to the fireplace and knelt down. He ran his hands along the stones, feeling for anything unusual. And there on the left side near the bottom, one stone moved slightly under his touch. His heart hammering, Coulter worked the stone loose. Behind it was a small hollow space. And inside that space was a leather pouch cracked with age. With trembling hands, Coulter pulled out the pouch and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. He unfolded it carefully. It was a map. Not a professional surveyor's map, but a hand-drawn sketch in his father's familiar handwriting. It showed the boundaries of Red Mesa Ranch. And in the center, marked with an X, was a spot labeled simply the mine. Coulter stared at the map, his mind reeling. It was real. The silver mine was real, and his father had known about it. But there was something else in the pouch. A letter, also in his father's handwriting. Coulter unfolded it with shaking hands and began to read. "My dear son, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you deserve to know the truth. The mine is real. I found it last spring, pure silver, more than I could have imagined. But Silas Drummond knows about it too. He has been threatening me, demanding that I sell him the land. I have refused. This land is your inheritance, Coulter, your birthright. I will not let him take it. But if something happens to me, you must be careful. Drummond is a dangerous man. He will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Find the map. Keep it safe. And remember that I love you, son. Whatever happens, know that everything I did was to protect you and this land. Your father, James Hayes. The letter was dated 3 days before his father's death. Coulter read it 3 times, tears blurring his vision. His father had known that Drummond was a threat, known that something might happen, and still he had refused to give up the land. Pride and grief warred in Coulter's chest. His father had been brave, standing up to a powerful man to protect his son's future, but that courage had cost him his life. Now it was up to Coulter to finish what his father had started. He folded the letter and map carefully and tucked them back into the leather pouch. Then he hid the pouch under his mattress. Tomorrow, when Aida returned, he would show her what he had found, and together they would bring Silas Drummond to justice. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mesa in shades of crimson and gold. The land looked peaceful, beautiful even, but Coulter knew now that beneath that beauty lay secrets, secrets worth killing for. He stood at his window watching the last light fade from the sky and made a silent promise to his father's memory. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hunt for truth had just begun. Dawn came slowly to Red Mesa Ranch, painting the desert sky in streaks of pink and orange. Coulter had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's handwriting on that letter, warning him about Silas Drummond, warning him to be careful. But careful had never brought justice to anyone. He dressed quickly, splashing cold water on his face from the basin. The leather pouch with the map and letter felt like it was burning a hole under his mattress. Physical proof that his father had been murdered, proof that Silas Drummond was responsible. But as Aida had said, suspicion wasn't enough. They needed evidence that would stand up in a court of law. Coulter fed the horses and checked the cattle, going through his morning routine by habit rather than conscious thought. His mind was elsewhere, planning, considering options. Ben arrived just after sunrise, whistling tunelessly as he approached the barn. "Morning, boss," Ben called out. "You look like you didn't sleep much." "Didn't," Coulter admitted. He hesitated, then added, "Ben, what do you know about Silas Drummond?" Ben's cheerful expression faded. He leaned against the barn door, crossing his arms. "No, he's richer than God and twice as mean. Why are you asking?" "Just curious," Coulter lied. But Ben wasn't fooled. He studied Coulter's face with shrewd eyes. "This got something to do with that Apache woman yesterday." Aida. Coulter didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "You ever hear rumors about Drummond, about how he got so rich?" "Plenty of rumors," Ben said slowly. "Folks say he's not particular about how he acquires mining claims. Some say he's run people off their land. Some say worse." He paused. "Why you thinking Drummond had something to do with your pa's death?" The direct question hung in the air between them. Coulter met Ben's gaze steadily. "I'm thinking a lot of things, and I'm thinking it might get dangerous." Ben pushed off from the barn door and squared his shoulders. "Then I reckon I'm staying close. Your pa gave me work when no one else would. I owe him, and I owe you." Something tight in Coulter's chest loosened. "Appreciate that, Ben." They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, but Coulter's attention kept drifting to the road that led from town. Aida had said she would come today. He found himself watching for the telltale dust cloud that would signal an approaching rider. It was nearly mid-morning when she finally appeared. Storm moved at an easy canter across the grassland. Aida, sitting tall in the saddle. She wore different clothes today, a split riding skirt and a white blouse, more practical for traveling. But her long black hair still hung loose down her back, and her dark eyes still held that keen intelligence. Coulter walked out to meet her as she dismounted near the barn. "You're later than I expected." "I had to wait for my aunt to leave for the market," Aida explained. She asks too many questions about where I'm going and why. Does she know you're investigating my father's death? No one knows except you and me, Aida said, and I'd like to keep it that way. The fewer people who know what we're doing, the safer we'll be. Coulter nodded. I found something last night, something you need to see. He led her into the cabin and retrieved the leather pouch from its hiding place. Aida's eyes widened as he spread the map and letter on the table. She read the letter slowly, her finger tracing the words. When she finished, she looked up at him with an expression that mixed triumph and concern. This is exactly what we needed, she said, your father's own words stating that Drummond threatened him. Dated just days before his death. But it's not proof of murder, Coulter pointed out. A lawyer could argue that my father was mistaken, that Drummond never actually did anything. Which is why we need more, Aida agreed. She pulled out her notebook and opened it to a fresh page. We need to build a case. Facts, witnesses, evidence that connects Drummond directly to your father's death. Where do we start? Aida tapped her pen against her lips, thinking. Your father must have kept other papers, business records, correspondence, maybe a journal. If Drummond was pressuring him to sell, there might be letters or documents that prove it. Coulter shook his head. I've been through everything in this cabin a dozen times. There's nothing else. What about in town? Did your father have an office there? A bank box? No office. But he did have a bank account at Pine Valley Savings. Coulter paused. And my Aunt Maggie lives in town. She and my father were close. If he confided in anyone, it would have been her. Then that's where we start, Aida said decisively. She stood up, already moving toward the door. We ride to Pine Valley, talk to your aunt, check the bank, see what we can find. Hold on, Coulter said. Pine Valley is Drummond's territory. If we start asking questions, people will talk. Word will get back to him. Then we'll have to be careful, Aida replied. But we can't just sit here, Coulter. Every day that passes, the trail gets colder. Memories fade. Evidence disappears. She was right, and Coulter knew it. He grabbed his hat and the leather pouch. Ben, he called out the door, I'm heading into town. You're in charge till I get back. Ben appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His gaze flickered between Coulter and Aida. You two be careful. And boss, take your gun. Coulter's hand went instinctively to his hip where his father's old Colt revolver rested in its holster. He'd strapped it on that morning without really thinking about it. Now he was glad he had. The ride to Pine Valley took just under an hour. The town sat in a shallow valley surrounded by low hills, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a single main street. There was a general store, a saloon, a bank, a church, and a scattering of houses. Maybe 300 people called Pine Valley home, most of them miners or ranchers or the merchants who served them. Coulter and Aida drew stares as they rode down the main street. It wasn't uncommon to see Apache people in town, but a well-dressed Apache woman riding alongside a white rancher was unusual enough to attract attention. Coulter could feel eyes on them from every doorway and window. They stopped first at the bank, a squat brick building that looked more solid than anything else in town. Inside, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous manner sat behind a desk. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to poorly concealed suspicion when he saw Aida. Mr. Hayes, the banker said, standing, what brings you to town today? Morning, Mr. Fletcher, Coulter replied. I need to look at my father's accounts. Any papers or documents he might have left in your care. Fletcher's nervous manner intensified. Well, I don't know about that. Those are private records. I'd need some kind of authorization. I'm his son, Coulter said, keeping his voice level. His only heir. Everything that was his is now mine, including whatever papers he left with you. The banker hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting to Aida, as if her presence somehow made the situation more complicated. Finally, he said, Wait here. I'll check the vault. He disappeared through a door behind his desk. Coulter and Aida stood in silence, listening to the muffled sounds of the banker moving things around. When Fletcher returned, he was carrying a small metal box. Your father left this here for safekeeping about 4 years ago, Fletcher said. Never came back for it. You'll need to sign for it." Coulter signed the ledger and took the box. It was heavier than it looked, locked with a small padlock. "You have a key for this." "No, sir. Your father kept the only key." Outside, Coulter turned the box over in his hands, examining the lock. It was old rusty. He could probably break it open with the right tools. But before he could suggest going back to the ranch, Aida reached out and took the box from him. She pulled a thin piece of wire from her satchel and began working it into the lock with practiced ease. 30 seconds later, there was a soft click, and the lock fell open. Coulter stared at her. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My cousin taught me," Aida said with a slight smile. "He had a talent for getting into places he shouldn't be." Inside the box were papers, letters mostly, along with some legal documents and a leather-bound journal. Coulter rifled through them quickly, his heart sinking. Most of it was routine business correspondence, bills of sale for cattle, receipts for supplies. But then Aida pulled out a letter written on expensive paper sealed with red wax that had been broken. She read it quickly, her expression darkening. "Coulter," she said quietly, "you need to see this." The letter was dated 6 months before James Hayes died. It was short, written in an elegant hand. "Mr. Hayes, this is my final offer. $5,000 for Red Mesa Ranch and all mineral rights pertaining thereto. If you continue to refuse, I cannot guarantee your safety or the safety of your property. Business in these territories can be dangerous for those who lack proper protection. I trust you will reconsider. Silas Drummond." Coulter read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. It was a threat, barely veiled, but unmistakable. Drummond had warned his father, and 6 months later, James Hayes was dead. "This is evidence," Aida said. "Direct evidence of threat and intimidation." "But still not proof of murder," Coulter countered. "Drummond could say he was just warning my father about general dangers, bandits, accidents, whatever." "Maybe," Aida conceded, "but it's another piece of the puzzle. And look, there are more letters." There were 3 more letters from Drummond, each one progressively more insistent and threatening. The last one, dated just 2 weeks before James Hayes died, was the most explicit. "You are making a grave mistake, Hayes. Men have died for less than what lies beneath your land. Reconsider while you still can." Coulter's hands were shaking as he folded the letters and put them back in the box. 3 years of wondering, 3 years of living in the dark, and now the truth was emerging piece by piece. His father had been murdered for refusing to sell his land, murdered by Silas Drummond or by men acting on Drummond's orders. "We need to talk to your aunt," Aida said. "See if she knows anything else." Maggie Hayes lived in a small house on the edge of town, a neat little cottage with a white picket fence and flower boxes in the windows. She was hanging laundry when Coulter and Aida arrived, and her face lit up when she saw her nephew. "Coulter!" She hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "What a lovely surprise! I was just thinking about you." Her gaze shifted to Aida, and her expression became curious but not unkind. "And who is your friend?" "This is Aida Riverhawk," Coulter said. "Aida, my Aunt Maggie." "Pleased to meet you, dear," Maggie said, extending her hand. Aida shook it, and Maggie smiled. "You have a good grip. I like that in a woman. Come inside, both of you. I'll make tea." Inside the cottage, everything was warm and comfortable, filled with the kind of small touches that made a house a home. Embroidered cushions, fresh flowers, a quilt draped over the back of the sofa. Maggie bustled about making tea while Coulter and Aida sat at the kitchen table. When she finally sat down with them, Maggie looked at Coulter with knowing eyes. "You didn't come all this way just to visit your old aunt. What's troubling you, child?" Coulter took a breath. "Aunt Maggie, I need to ask you about my father, about the months before he died." Maggie's expression grew sad. "Oh, Coulter, are you still dwelling on that James wouldn't want you to torture yourself?" "I'm not torturing myself," Coulter said gently. "I'm looking for the truth. Did my father ever talk to you about Silas Drummond?" The change in Maggie was immediate. Her face paled and her teacup rattled slightly as she set it down. "Why are you asking about Drummond?" "Because I think he killed my father," Coulter said bluntly, "and I think you know something about it." Maggie was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your father made me promise not to tell you. He didn't want you getting involved, didn't want you putting yourself in danger." "He's dead, Aunt Maggie," Coulter said. "Whatever promise you made, it doesn't matter anymore. I need to know." Maggie stood up and walked to a cabinet in the corner. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside were letters, photographs, and at the bottom a leather-bound journal. "Your father kept a journal," Maggie said, handing it to Coulter. "He gave it to me 3 days before he died. Told me to hide it, keep it safe. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you were ready." Coulter opened the journal with trembling hands. The entries were dated starting from 3 years before his father's death. He flipped to the last few pages to the entries written in the final weeks of James Hayes's life. One entry dated 5 days before his death made Coulter's blood run cold. "Drummond came to the ranch today with 2 of his men. He didn't threaten me openly, but the message was clear. Sell or face the consequences. I told him this land belongs to Coulter, and I will not let a man like him take it. But I am afraid, not for myself, but for my son. If something happens to me, I pray Coulter will be wise enough to walk away. The silver is not worth dying for." But the entry that followed was even more damning. "I have decided to go to the marshal in Prescott. I will tell him everything about Drummond's threats, about the silver mine, about all of it. If I have the law on my side, perhaps Drummond will back down. I leave tomorrow at dawn." James Hayes never made it to Prescott. He died that night shot in the chest while tending to his horses. Coulter closed the journal, his vision blurred with tears. His father had tried to do the right thing, tried to get the law involved, and Drummond had silenced him before he could. "I'm sorry, Coulter," Maggie said softly. "I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you'd go after Drummond and end up dead too." "You did what you thought was right," Coulter said. He looked at Aida. "But now we have what we need, letters threatening my father, a journal documenting those threats, evidence that my father was going to the marshal the day he died." "It's enough to open an investigation," Aida agreed. "But we need to be smart about this. If we go to the local sheriff, he might be in Drummond's pocket. We need to go higher." "The territorial marshal," Coulter said, "based in Prescott, just like my father planned." They talked for another hour, planning their next moves. Maggie insisted they stay for lunch, and over cold chicken and fresh bread, they refined their strategy. They would ride to Prescott, present their evidence to the marshal, and let the law handle Drummond. It was the civilized way, the right way. But as they prepared to leave, Maggie pulled Coulter aside. "Be careful, nephew. Drummond has eyes and ears everywhere. If he finds out what you're doing, he'll come for you just like he came for your father." "Let him come," Coulter said grimly. "I'm not running." They rode out of Pine Valley as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Coulter carried the metal box with the letters, and Aida had his father's journal safely tucked in her satchel. They had evidence. They had a plan. But as they crested the rise overlooking Red Mesa Ranch, Coulter saw something that made his heart sink. 2 men on horseback were waiting near his cabin, and from the way they sat, their saddles hard and ready, Coulter knew they weren't there for a friendly visit. "Drummond's men," he said quietly. Aida's hand went to the knife at her belt. What do we do? Coulter thought fast. They could turn around, ride back to town, go straight to the marshal. But that would mean abandoning Ben, leaving his friend alone and vulnerable. And it would mean letting Drummond's men search his cabin, possibly finding the map and destroying evidence. No, running wasn't an option. "We face them," Coulter said. He touched the Colt at his hip. "Together." They rode down the slope toward the cabin, Coulter's pulse hammering in his ears. This was it, the moment where everything would change, where the hunt for truth would turn into something more dangerous, something that might end in blood. The two men watched them approach with cold, calculating eyes. And Coulter knew with absolute certainty that before this day was over, someone was going to get hurt. The two men waiting by Coulter's cabin looked like what they were hired guns. One was tall and lean with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. The other was shorter but broader, built like a bull with a face that suggested he'd been in more than his share of fights. Coulter and Aida rode closer, moving at a steady pace that suggested confidence they didn't entirely feel. Coulter's hand rested casually near his Colt ready, but not threatening. Not yet. The scarred man spoke first, his voice gravelly. "Coulter Hayes." "That's right," Coulter replied, reining Dusty to a stop about 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if things went bad. "And you are—" "Names don't matter," the man said. "What matters is you got something that belongs to Mr. Drummond." "I don't have anything that belongs to Drummond," Coulter said evenly. "Everything on this property is mine." The bull-faced man spat into the dirt. "Mr. Drummond says otherwise. Says your daddy found something that rightfully belongs to him. A map, maybe, some papers." So Drummond knew. Somehow word had gotten back to him that Coulter was asking questions, digging into the past. Which meant someone in town had talked. Or maybe Drummond had been watching all along, waiting to see if Coulter would find what his father had hidden. "You can tell Drummond I don't know what he's talking about," Coulter said. His mind was racing, calculating distances, angles, possibilities. 2 against 2, but these men were professionals. And Aida, for all her courage, wasn't a gunfighter. The scarred man's eyes flickered to Aida, then back to Coulter. "That's not the answer Mr. Drummond wants to hear. He's a patient man, but his patience has limits. Now you can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Either way, we're going to search that cabin." "No," Coulter said flatly. "You're not." The tension ratcheted up instantly. The bull-faced man's hand moved toward his gun, but before anyone could draw a shotgun blast, shattered the afternoon silence. Everyone froze. Ben Carter stepped out from behind the barn, a smoking double-barrel shotgun in his hands. "Next one goes in somebody," he called out. "And I ain't particular about who." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, assessing this new threat. "This ain't your fight, Cowboy." "Boss is my friend," Ben replied, his voice steady. "That makes it my fight." For a long moment, nobody moved. The afternoon sun beat down on the tableau, 5 people caught in a moment that could explode into violence at any second. Then the scarred man slowly raised his hands, palms out. "All right. No need for shooting. We're just delivering a message." "Message delivered," Coulter said. "Now get off my land." The two men exchanged a look. Then, moving carefully, they turned their horses and rode away at a trot. But the scarred man called back over his shoulder, "Mr. Drummond will want an answer, Hayes, and he won't wait long." They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Ben lower the shotgun, his hands shaking slightly. "Jesus, boss, what the hell was that about?" Coulter dismounted and helped Aida down from Storm. "That was Silas Drummond making his move. He knows we're investigating." "Which means we're running out of time," Aida added. She looked at Coulter, her dark eyes serious. "If Drummond is sending men here, he's worried. That means we're close to something he doesn't want found." They went inside the cabin, Ben following with his shotgun still ready. Coulter poured whiskey for all 3 of them, his hand steadier than he felt. The confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Not because he was afraid, but because it made everything real. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore. It was about survival. "Tell me everything," Ben said, taking a long drink. "And don't leave nothing out." So Coulter told him. About the silver mine, about his father's letters and journal, about the threats from Drummond. Ben listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Coulter finished, Ben set down his glass and looked at him squarely. "You're going after him, after Drummond." "Through the law," Coulter said. "We're taking everything to the marshal in Prescott." "And you think the law will protect you?" Ben's voice was skeptical. "Boss men like Drummond don't play by rules. They buy judges, bribe lawmen, make witnesses disappear. You go after him legal, and he'll just find a way around it." "Then what would you have me do?" Coulter demanded. "Ride into town and shoot him." "That's murder, Ben. That makes me no better than him." "It makes you alive," Ben countered. But he held up a hand before Coulter could respond. "But I ain't saying you should. I'm just saying be realistic about what you're up against." Aida had been quiet during this exchange, standing by the window and watching the land beyond. Now she turned to face them. "Ben is right about one thing. We can't just ride to Prescott and hope the marshal will handle it. We need more than letters and a journal. We need a witness, someone who saw what happened the night James Hayes died." "There weren't any witnesses," Coulter said. "The sheriff investigated. Nobody saw or heard anything." "Or nobody who was willing to talk," Aida corrected. "But people see more than they admit, especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business." She pulled out her notebook and opened it to a page covered in names and notes. "I've been talking to people in Pine Valley for months, and there's one name that keeps coming up. A woman named Sarah Whitmore. She runs the boarding house on the edge of town. The night your father died, she told the sheriff she heard nothing. But one of the other boarders told me Sarah was up late that night, couldn't sleep. And the boarding house has a view of the road that leads to Red Mesa Ranch." Coulter felt a spark of hope. "You think she saw something?" "I think it's possible," Aida said. "But she's scared. I tried to talk to her once before, and she practically slammed the door in my face. If she knows something, she's been keeping quiet for a reason." "Fear," Ben said. "If Drummond killed Hayes, and she saw it, she's probably terrified he'll kill her too if she talks." "Then we need to convince her she'll be safe," Coulter said, "that we can protect her if she comes forward." "Can we?" Aida asked quietly. "Can we really promise her that—" It was a fair question, and Coulter didn't have a good answer. But before he could try to formulate one, they heard horses approaching again. Multiple horses this time. Ben grabbed his shotgun and moved to the window. Then he relaxed slightly. "It's okay. It's not Drummond's men. Looks like Apache, maybe a dozen riders." Aida's face brightened. She hurried outside and Coulter followed. The riders were indeed Apache, led by an old man whose long white hair hung in 2 braids down his chest. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since childhood, despite what must have been at least 70 years of age. Aida rushed forward and spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Coulter and the cabin. The old man listened, then dismounted with surprising agility. He approached Coulter with measured steps, his dark eyes studying the younger man's face. "You are the son of James Hayes," the old man said in English, his accent thick but his words clear. "I am Red Sky Walker, Aida's grandfather." Coulter found himself face to face with the Apache elder who had started all of this, the man who had sent his granddaughter to investigate who knew secrets about the silver mine and the land. He extended his hand. "Mr. Walker, thank you for coming." Red Sky ignored the hand and instead placed both palms on Coulter's shoulders, looking into his eyes with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. After a long moment, he nodded. "You have your father's spirit. Good. You will need it." He turned to the other riders and spoke in Apache. They dismounted and began setting up a camp near the barn, moving with practiced efficiency. Red Sky walked to the cabin, moving as if he owned the place. Inside, he looked around with interest, his gaze lingering on the fireplace. "James Hayes sat in that chair," he said, pointing to the worn leather chair near the hearth. "We talked many times about the land, about the old days, about the silver that sleeps beneath the mesa." "You knew about the mine," Coulter said. "It wasn't a question." "I have always known," Red Sky replied. He settled into the chair with a sigh, as comfortable as if he'd lived there all his life. "My people have known for generations, long before the white men came with their picks and their greed." He accepted the whiskey Ben offered and took a small sip before continuing. "In the year the white men call 1862, there was war. Your people fighting each other, brother against brother. Some of that war came here to this territory. A prospector named Daniel Drummond fled the fighting seeking safety. My father's band found him near death from thirst. They saved him, brought him to the hidden springs beneath the mesa. Red Sky's eyes grew distant, seeing into the past. Daniel Drummond was grateful. He was also observant. He saw the silver in the rocks, the veins running through the stone like frozen lightning. He made maps, careful maps, thinking he would return when the war ended and claim his fortune. But he never got the chance, Aida said softly, sitting cross-legged on the floor near her grandfather. No. Red Sky agreed. His own son betrayed him. Silas Drummond's father, Marcus. Marcus wanted the maps, wanted the silver for himself. He killed Daniel in his sleep and took the maps. But my father saw this, saw the murder, saw the theft. He took the maps back and hid them in the sacred cave beneath the mesa. And your people never told anyone? Coulter asked. Red Sky looked at him with something like pity. We told James Hayes, because he was a good man who treated my people with respect. We showed him the cave, showed him the silver, told him the history. We made him promise that if he used the silver, he would share it, use it to help both our peoples. And my father agreed, Coulter said. He did more than agree, Red Sky replied. He swore an oath, a blood oath in the old way. He cut his palm and mine, and we mixed our blood over the silver. He became, in the eyes of my people, one of us, a brother. The revelation hit Coulter like a physical blow. His father bound by blood oath to the Apache. It explained so much. Why James Hayes had refused to sell despite Drummond's threats. Why he'd been willing to die rather than give up the land. Silas Drummond learned of this, Red Sky continued. Not all of it, but enough. He knew your father had found the silver, knew the maps existed, and he knew that if James Hayes lived, he would never get his hands on it. So he killed him, Coulter said flatly. He ordered it done, Red Sky corrected. Marcus Drummond killed with his own hands. Silas Drummond kills with money and hired guns. But the guilt is the same. Red Sky reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a piece of tanned hide covered in symbols and lines. Another map, older than the one James Hayes had drawn, marked with Apache pictographs. This is the original map, Red Sky said. Daniel Drummond drew it, but my father added our sacred markers, our warnings, our history. I give it to you now, Coulter Hayes, not because the silver is yours, but because the responsibility is yours. You are your father's son. His oath is now your oath. Coulter took the hide with trembling hands. The weight of it felt like more than just dried skin and faded ink. It felt like history, like destiny, like a burden he hadn't asked for, but couldn't refuse. I don't know if I can keep that oath, he said honestly. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Your father had doubts too, Red Sky said, but he found his strength when it mattered, as will you. The old man stood signaling that the conversation was over. My warriors will camp here tonight. Tomorrow we ride with you to find this woman, this Sarah Whitmore. She will speak the truth, or she will face the judgment of those she has wronged by her silence. After Red Sky left to join his people by the fire they'd built, Coulter sat staring at the two maps spread before him on the table. His father's careful sketch and the ancient Apache hide. Two pieces of the same puzzle separated by time, but connected by blood and betrayal. You're not alone in this, Aida said quietly. She'd stayed behind when her grandfather left, standing close enough that Coulter could smell the sage and sweetgrass scent of her hair. Whatever happens, we face it together. Coulter looked up at her, seeing not just a brave woman or a skilled investigator, but someone who understood what it meant to be caught between two worlds, someone who knew about duty and honor and the weight of promises made by those who came before. Why are you helping me? He asked. Really, it's more than just investigating a story. Aida was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Because my grandfather loved your father like a brother. Because the oath your father swore matters to my people, and because, She hesitated, then met his eyes directly. Because I believe in justice. Real justice, not the kind that comes from a gun or a rope. The kind that comes from truth and courage and people standing together. That's a lot to believe in, Coulter said. Yes, Aida agreed. But someone has to. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mesa in shades of crimson and gold. The Apache warriors sat around their fire, their voices rising and falling in songs that had been old when this land was young. And somewhere in Pine Valley, Silas Drummond was planning his next move, unaware that the net was slowly closing around him. Coulter stood and walked to the window, watching the darkness gather. Tomorrow they would ride to town. Tomorrow they would confront Sarah Whitmore and try to extract the truth she'd been hiding for 3 years. Tomorrow, the careful game of cat and mouse would escalate into something more dangerous. But tonight, for just a few hours, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes before a storm, fragile and precious and fleeting. Ben came in from checking the horses and poured himself another whiskey. "You know this is crazy, right?" he said to no one in particular. "Going up against a man like Drummond, probably going to get us all killed." "Probably," Coulter agreed. "Well then," Ben raised his glass. "Here's to dying for something that matters." Aida picked up her own glass and touched it to Ben's, then to Coulter's. "To truth," she said. "To justice," Coulter added. They drank in silence, 3 unlikely allies bound together by circumstance and choice. And outside, the Apache drums began to beat a rhythm as old as the land itself, calling to something primal and true in the heart of every person who heard them. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since his father died, Coulter Hayes felt something he'd almost forgotten. He felt hope. Dawn broke cold and gray over Red Mesa Ranch. Coulter woke to the sound of Apache voices outside, the warriors already preparing for the ride to Pine Valley. He dressed quickly, his muscles stiff from a restless night spent thinking about what lay ahead. Sarah Whitmore was their best hope for a witness. Maybe their only hope. If she refused to talk or if her testimony proved worthless, then all they had were letters and journals. Circumstantial evidence that a good lawyer could tear apart in minutes. Coulter stepped outside to find Red Sky Walker standing on a small rise facing east as the sun climbed above the horizon. The old man's lips moved silently, words in Apache that Coulter couldn't hear or understand. Prayer, maybe, or simply greeting the new day in the old way. When Red Sky finished, he turned and saw Coulter watching. "You slept poorly," the elder observed. It wasn't a question. "Hard to sleep when you know what's coming," Coulter admitted. "The hard thing and the right thing are often the same thing," Red Sky said. He walked down from the rise, moving with the careful dignity of age. "Today we will ask a frightened woman to be brave. We will ask her to risk her safety for justice. That is a hard thing. What if she refuses? Then we find another way." Red Sky replied simply, "There is always another way, but first we must try this one." Aida emerged from the barn where she'd slept among the hay bales, insisting she needed no special accommodation. Her hair was braided now, practical for riding, and she wore a leather vest over her blouse. She looked every inch the Apache woman. She was strong and capable. "Grandfather says we should take only a few riders," she told Coulter. "Too many Apache warriors riding into Pine Valley will cause panic. The people there are nervous enough without thinking they're under attack." "Smart," Coulter agreed. "Just you, me, Red Sky, and maybe 2 others. "And me," Ben added, walking up with his shotgun slung over his shoulder. "I know Sarah Whitmore. She used to make pies for the church socials. Good woman, just scared. Maybe seeing a familiar face will help." They selected 2 younger warriors to accompany them, both chosen for their calm demeanor and ability to speak English. By the time the sun was fully up, the 6 riders were heading toward Pine Valley at an easy canter. The ride took just over an hour. They entered town from the north, drawing immediate attention. People stopped on the boardwalks to stare. Curtains twitched in windows. A few men emerged from the saloon hands, resting on gun belts, watching the Apache riders with wary eyes. Coulter led them straight to the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the siding, and one of the shutters hung crooked. But the front porch was swept clean, and flower boxes beneath the windows held bright geraniums. They dismounted and tied their horses to the rail. Red Sky and the 2 warriors stayed with the animals, while Coulter, Aita, and Ben approached the front door. Before Coulter could knock, the door swung open. Sarah Whitmore stood in the doorway, a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a plain brown dress and an apron dusted with flour. Her gaze moved from Coulter to Ben to Aita, and something like fear flickered across her face. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "I heard you were asking questions around town. Figured you'd get to me eventually, Mrs. Whitmore." Coulter removed his hat. "I need to talk to you about the night my father died." "I already told the sheriff everything I know," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I didn't see nothing, didn't hear nothing." "That's not true," Aita said gently, "and we both know it." Sarah's hands twisted in her apron. She glanced past them to the street, checking to see who might be watching. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "It's not safe for you to keep lying either," Coulter said. "Please, Mrs. Whitmore, my father deserves justice, and you're the only one who can help him get it." For a long moment Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. Then her shoulders sagged, and tears welled in her eyes. "Come inside, quickly before anyone sees." They followed her into a modest parlor cluttered with mismatched furniture. Sarah closed the door and drew the curtains before turning to face them. Her hands were shaking. "I have a daughter," she said abruptly. "Emily. She's 10 years old. After my husband died, this boarding house was all we had. If I lose it, if something happens to me, she has nowhere to go. Do you understand?" "I understand you're afraid," Coulter said. "But Mrs. Whitmore, Silas Drummond killed my father, and he'll kill again if someone doesn't stop him." "You don't know that for certain," Sarah protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Yes, I do," Coulter replied. He pulled out his father's journal and the letters from Drummond, spreading them on a side table. "Read these. Read what Drummond wrote to my father, the threats, the intimidation. And then tell me you don't know who's responsible." Sarah picked up one of the letters with trembling hands. She read it slowly, her face growing paler with each word. When she finished, she set it down and covered her face with her hands. "I saw them," she whispered. "That night. I saw 2 men ride past the boarding house around midnight. They were heading toward Red Mesa Ranch. I recognized one of them, Jake Thornton. He does odd jobs for Mr. Drummond." "Did you see them come back?" Aita asked. Sarah nodded, lowering her hands. Her eyes were red, but determined now, as if saying the words out loud had released something that had been building inside her for 3 years. About an hour later, they rode past again, moving fast. And one of them, Jake, he had blood on his shirt. I could see it in the moonlight. The room fell silent. This was it. Direct testimony linking Drummond's man to the scene of the murder on the night it happened. Combined with the letters and journal, it was enough. Enough to arrest Drummond, enough to bring him to trial. "Will you testify?" Coulter asked. "Will you tell a marshal what you just told us?" "If I do, Drummond will come for me," Sarah said. "And for Emily." "Then we protect you," Ben spoke up. "You and your daughter both. We'll take you somewhere safe until Drummond is behind bars." "And where would that be?" Sarah asked bitterly. "Drummond has men everywhere. He has money influence. Even if I testify and he's arrested, he could post bail. He could walk free within days." "Not if we present enough evidence," Aita said. "Not if we can prove premeditated murder. There's no bail for that." Red Sky Walker had been standing silently near the window, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. Now he spoke for the first time since entering the house. "The woman speaks truth. She is in danger. But there are worse things than danger. There is the burden of knowing you let evil go unpunished because you were afraid." His words, though gentle, carried weight. Sarah looked at the old Apache elder, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, of what it meant to live with fear versus what it meant to live with shame. "My grandfather can offer protection," Aida said. "Our people have places in the mountains where Drummond's men won't find you, places where you and your daughter will be safe." Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the street. Coulter could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. When she turned back, her jaw was set with determination. "All right," she said, "I'll testify. But I want your word that Emily stays safe. Whatever happens to me, you protect my daughter." "You have my word," Coulter said solemnly. "On my father's grave, I swear it." "And mine," Aida added. Red Sky simply nodded, which seemed to carry more weight than any verbal promise. Sarah disappeared upstairs and returned a few minutes later with a small girl in tow. Emily Whitmore had her mother's features, but her father's red gold hair. She clutched a rag doll and looked at the visitors with wide, uncertain eyes. "Emily, these people are going to help us," Sarah said, kneeling to her daughter's level. "We're going on a little trip, an adventure." "Where are we going, Mama?" the girl asked. "Somewhere safe," Sarah replied. She looked up at Coulter. "When do we leave?" "Now," Coulter said. "Pack whatever you need. We ride within the hour." While Sarah and Emily gathered their belongings, Coulter stepped outside with Aida and Ben. The street was busier now, townspeople going about their morning business. But Coulter noticed a man standing across the street watching the boarding house with undisguised interest. He recognized the scarred face. One of the men who'd come to his ranch the day before. "We've been spotted," Coulter said quietly. Ben followed his gaze and cursed under his breath. "He'll report back to Drummond. We need to move fast." "Get the horses ready," Coulter ordered. "Aida, tell your grandfather what's happening. We may need to fight our way out of town." But even as he spoke, the scarred man was already moving, disappearing into the saloon. Coulter knew what would happen next. Word would spread. Drummond would be alerted. And men would come, probably armed, probably willing to do whatever it took to stop Sarah Whitmore from leaving Pine Valley. Sure enough, less than 5 minutes later, a group of men emerged from the saloon. 6 of them, all carrying rifles. They spread out across the street, blocking the route north out of town. The scarred man stood in the center, his hand resting on his gun. "Hayes," he called out, "Mr. Drummond wants a word with you, and with Mrs. Whitmore." "Mrs. Whitmore isn't going anywhere with you," Coulter called back. He stepped off the porch, putting himself between the gunman and the boarding house. Ben moved to his left, shotgun ready. The 2 Apache warriors fanned out to the right. Red Sky Walker walked calmly to stand beside Coulter, his weathered hands empty, but his presence commanding. "This woman is under our protection now," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Any man who touches her will answer to the White Mountain Apache." That gave the gunman pause. Starting a fight with Coulter Hayes was one thing. Starting a fight that could escalate into conflict with an entire Apache band was something else entirely. The scarred man hesitated, clearly uncertain. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Silas Drummond himself stepped out of the saloon, and Coulter got his first good look at the man who'd killed his father. Drummond was in his early 50s, tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore an expensive suit and carried a gold-headed walking cane that probably cost more than most men in Pine Valley made in a year. But it was his eyes that caught Coulter's attention. Cold, calculating eyes that assessed everything and everyone with the gaze of a predator. "Mr. Hayes," Drummond said pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a church social, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Whitmore is a respected member of this community. She's free to go wherever she pleases." "Then you won't mind if she comes with us," Coulter replied. "Not at all," Drummond agreed. "Though I am curious why she would choose to leave her home and her business to ride off with strangers. Perhaps someone is coercing her, making threats." It was smoothly done, Coulter had to admit. Drummond was trying to turn the situation around, making it look like Coulter and the Apache were the villains. But before Coulter could respond, Sarah Whitmore stepped onto the porch, Emily beside her. Sarah was pale but composed, and when she spoke her voice was steady. "Nobody's forcing me, Mr. Drummond," she said clearly. "I'm leaving because I choose to. Because I have information about a murder, and I intend to share that information with the territorial marshal." The street went dead silent. Every eye turned to Sarah. Drummond's pleasant expression never changed, but something dark flickered in those cold eyes. "A murder," he repeated softly. "What murder would that be, Mrs. Whitmore?" "James Hayes," Sarah said. "I saw your man Jake Thornton ride past my house the night James Hayes was killed. I saw him come back an hour later with blood on his clothes, and I'm going to testify to that fact." Drummond stood very still. Then slowly he smiled. "Interesting. And you waited 3 years to come forward with this information. I wonder what a jury would think of that. I wonder if they'd believe a woman who suddenly remembered convenient details only after the son of the deceased started making accusations." "They'll believe her when they hear the rest of the evidence," Coulter said. "The letters you wrote to my father, his journal documenting your threats, the map showing the silver mine you wanted so badly. It all adds up, Drummond. You're finished." For just a moment the mask slipped. Drummond's face twisted with rage, and Coulter saw the real man beneath the civilized veneer. A man capable of murder, of ordering death, as casually as ordering dinner. But Drummond recovered quickly. He turned to his men. "Let them pass, Mrs. Whitmore is free to make whatever foolish choices she wants, but mark my words." He looked directly at Coulter. "The law works both ways, and I have lawyers who are very good at their jobs." It was a threat thinly veiled, but it was also a tactical retreat, and Coulter would take it. He helped Sarah and Emily onto one of the horses, Sarah riding behind one of the Apache warriors. Then they mounted up and rode slowly out of town, every nerve tensed for gunfire that never came. Only when they were a mile outside Pine Valley did Coulter allow himself to relax slightly. They'd done it. They had a witness. They had evidence. They had enough to take to the marshal and get Drummond arrested. But as they rode toward the mountains where Red Sky's people waited, Coulter couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Men like Silas Drummond didn't go down easily. They fought back with every resource at their disposal, and Drummond had just been backed into a corner, which made him more dangerous than ever. Aida rode up beside Coulter, her expression troubled. "That was too easy," she said quietly. "He let us go." "I know," Coulter replied. "Question is why." "Because he's planning something," Ben said from Coulter's other side. "And whatever it is, it ain't going to be good for us." They rode on in silence, climbing into the foothills as the sun climbed toward noon. Behind them, Pine Valley disappeared from view, and somewhere in that town, Silas Drummond was making plans of his own. The game had changed. The stakes were higher now, and before this was over, blood would almost certainly be spilled. But there was no turning back, not any more. The path was set, and they would see it through to the end, whatever that end might be. The Apache camp in the mountains was hidden in a box canyon 3 hours' ride from Pine Valley. Steep rock walls provided natural protection on 3 sides, and a narrow entrance that could be easily defended made it nearly impregnable. A small stream ran through the canyon floor, providing fresh water, and scattered juniper trees offered shade. Sarah Whitmore and her daughter were given a wickiup near the center of the camp, one of the traditional Apache dwellings made from wooden poles covered with brush and canvas. Sarah looked overwhelmed by it all, but Emily seemed fascinated, peering out at the Apache women preparing food and tending fires. "She'll be safe here," Red Sky assured Coulter. "My warriors will guard this canyon. Drummond's men could not find it, even if they knew where to look." "How long until we can get to Prescott?" Coulter asked. The territorial marshal's office was 2 days' hard ride to the north across difficult terrain. "We leave at first light tomorrow," Aida said. She'd been checking the supplies they'd need for the journey. "Yumi, Ben, and 2 warriors for protection. The rest will stay here to guard Sarah and Emily." "And the evidence," Coulter touched the leather satchel that held his father's journal, the letters from Drummond, and the 2 maps. "Stays with you at all times," Red Sky said. Those papers are the difference between justice and revenge. Lose them, and all you have is anger. Keep them, and you have the law on your side. That night, as the camp settled into quiet, Coulter sat by a fire with Aida and Ben. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, undimmed by any town lights. The kind of sky that made a man feel small and large, at the same time insignificant, and yet part of something eternal. "You ever killed a man?" Ben asked suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. Coulter shook his head. "No, you once," Ben said quietly. "Claim Jumper tried to shoot my partner in the back. I didn't think, just drew and fired. He died right there in the dirt." He stared into the flames. "I don't regret it. He needed killing. But I remember his face. Remember the way he looked at me when the bullet hit. Surprised, like he couldn't believe it was happening." "Why are you telling me this?" Coulter asked. "Because tomorrow or the day after, or sometime soon, you might have to make that choice," Ben replied. "Drummond won't go quiet. And when men like him feel cornered, they get desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." Aida spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "My grandfather says that violence is sometimes necessary, but it should never be easy. The moment killing becomes easy, you lose part of yourself." "Your grandfather is a wise man," Coulter said. "He's seen much death in his life," Aida replied. "The Apache have been fighting for survival for generations. Against the Spanish, against the Mexicans, against the Americans. We've learned that sometimes you must fight, but you should never forget the cost." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Coulter said, "Thank you, both of you, for standing with me in this." "Where else would we be?" Ben asked with a slight smile. Aida didn't answer with words. She simply reached over and squeezed Coulter's hand, her fingers warm against his. The gesture lasted only a moment, but it conveyed more than any speech could have. They rode out at dawn, the six of them forming a small column as they headed north through mountain passes and high desert plains. The land was beautiful and harsh, painted in shades of red and brown, and gold dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of pine. By midday of the second day, they could see Prescott in the distance. It was larger than Pine Valley, a proper town with brick buildings and paved streets, the territorial capital where laws were made and justice dispensed, or so the theory went. They rode straight to the marshal's office, a solid stone building near the courthouse. As they dismounted, Coulter felt his heart hammering. This was it, the moment 3 years of grief and anger had been building toward. Inside, a deputy looked up from his desk, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of 2 Apache warriors. "Help, you folks. We need to see Marshal Carter," Coulter said. "It's urgent." "The marshal's busy right now. You can wait or come back later." "We'll wait," Aida said firmly. They'd been sitting in the small waiting area for maybe 10 minutes when the inner office door opened and a man stepped out. He was in his mid-40s, tall and lean with graying hair and keen blue eyes. He wore a marshal's badge pinned to his vest and carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen plenty of trouble and wasn't impressed by it anymore. "I'm Marshal William Carter," he said. "Deputy tells me you have urgent business." "My name is Coulter Hayes." Coulter stood and extended his hand. "This is Aida Riverhawk and Ben Carter. We're here to report a murder and bring charges against the man responsible." Marshal Carter's eyebrows rose. "A murder? When and where?" 3 years ago. Red Mesa Ranch near Pine Valley. The victim was my father, James Hayes." Something flickered in the marshal's eyes. Recognition, maybe. "James Hayes. I remember that case. The local sheriff investigated. No suspects, no witnesses, no evidence. Case went cold." "We have evidence now," Coulter said, "and a witness." Carter studied them for a long moment, his gaze moving from face to face. Then he gestured toward his office. "Come in, all of you. Let's hear what you have." They spent the next 2 hours in Carter's office laying out everything. Coulter showed him the letters from Drummond, each one more threatening than the last. He showed him James Hayes' journal with its detailed accounts of Drummond's intimidation. He explained about the silver mine, about the maps, about the blood oath his father had made with the Apache. Aida provided her research, months of careful investigation documented in her notebooks. She'd built a timeline, connected dots, established patterns. And finally they told him about Sarah Whitmore, about what she'd seen the night of the murder and why she'd been too afraid to come forward until now. Marshal Carter listened to it all without interrupting his expression, giving nothing away. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "This is serious," he said finally. "Very serious. If even half of what you're telling me is true, Silas Drummond needs to answer for it." "So you'll arrest him?" Coulter asked, hope surging in his chest. "Not so fast." Carter held up a hand. "I need to verify some of this. I need to interview Mrs. Whitmore myself, get her statement on the record. I need to have these documents examined by someone who can authenticate them. And I need to do some investigating of my own." "How long will that take?" Aida asked. "A few days, maybe a week," Carter said. "Look, I understand you want justice and you want it now. But if we rush this, if we don't build an airtight case, a good lawyer will tear it apart. And Drummond has the best lawyers money can buy." Coulter wanted to argue, wanted to demand immediate action, but he forced himself to think clearly. Carter was right. They'd come this far by being careful and methodical. Rushing at the end could undo everything. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "First, I need Mrs. Whitmore brought here so I can take her statement," Carter said. "Then I need you to leave the investigating to me. Go back to your ranch. Go about your normal business. Don't confront Drummond. Don't do anything that might spook him into running." "And if he comes after us?" Ben asked. "Then you defend yourselves, but you don't go looking for trouble," Carter replied. He stood and extended his hand to Coulter. "You did the right thing bringing this to me. Let the law handle it from here." As they prepared to leave the marshal's office, an old man shuffled in from the street. He was perhaps 70, bent with age, wearing ragged clothes, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Marshal Carter," the old man said. "I heard you're investigating Silas Drummond." Carter frowned. "And you are?" "Marcus Drummond," the old man said quietly. "Silas's father, the man everyone thinks is dead." The room went silent. Coulter felt his hand move toward his gun. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Marcus said quickly. "I'm here to help. My son is a monster, and I made him that way. I killed Daniel Drummond for those maps 40 years ago. I taught Silas that power matters more than honor, and now," his voice broke, "now I want to stop him before he destroys more lives." Marcus pulled out a worn leather journal. "This is my confession. Every crime I committed, every murder I ordered, and every crime Silas learned from me. Use it, Marshal. Stop my son." Carter took the journal carefully. "Why now?" "Why, after all these years?" "Because I'm dying," Marcus said simply. "Cancer, maybe 6 months left. And I don't want to meet my maker with this blood on my hands." He looked at Coulter. "Your father was a good man, better than I ever was. I'm sorry for what my family took from you." Coulter stared at the old man, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. It didn't erase the past, but it was something. "Thank you," Coulter said finally, "for doing the right thing." They left the marshal's office feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that they'd finally gotten official help, frustration that justice would take time. "You trust him?" Ben asked as they mounted their horses. "I think so," Coulter replied. "He seemed genuine." "Seemed," Aida echoed, "but we won't know for certain until we see what he does." They made camp outside Prescott that night, not wanting to spend money on hotel rooms. As they sat around their small fire, one of the Apache warriors, a young man named Swift Arrow, spoke up. "The marshal is an honest man," he said in careful English. "But he is one man, and Drummond has many men, many guns." "What are you saying?" Coulter asked. "I am saying that maybe the white man's law is not enough," Swift Arrow replied. "Maybe we need to be ready for war." Red Sky had given similar warnings before they left. The Apache way was direct. Justice through action, not paper and courtrooms. But Coulter had committed to the legal path, and he needed to see it through. "If it comes to that, we'll be ready," Coulter said, "but we give the law its chance first." They rode back to the mountain camp the next day, collecting Sarah Whitmore for the journey to Prescott. Sarah was nervous about leaving Emily, but Red Sky's wife, a dignified older woman named Morning Dove, had taken the girl under her wing. Emily seemed happy playing with Apache children her own age, learning words in their language. "She'll be safe," Red Sky assured Sarah. "Safer here than anywhere else." The trip to Prescott and back took 4 days total. Marshal Carter took Sarah's statement, had it witnessed and notarized, and promised to begin his investigation immediately. Sarah returned to the mountain camp while Coulter, Aida, and Ben headed back to Red Mesa Ranch. They arrived to find everything as they'd left it. The cattle were fine, the horses healthy. But there was a note nailed to the cabin door, written in elegant script. "Mr. Hayes, I'm disappointed that you've chosen to involve the territorial marshal in what should have been a private business matter. I hope you realize that spreading false accusations against a prominent citizen like myself will have consequences, legal consequences. I suggest you reconsider your course of action while you still can. Regards, Silas Drummond." "He knows," Ben said. "About Carter, about everything." "Of course he knows," Aida replied. "Men like Drummond have informants everywhere, probably someone in the marshal's office." Coulter crumpled the note in his fist. "Doesn't matter. We've done everything right. We have evidence. We have a witness. We have the law on our side." "Then why does this feel like the calm before the storm?" Ben asked. Because it was. They all knew it. Drummond had been warned, which meant he'd be preparing his defense, or preparing to eliminate the threat entirely. That night, Coulter couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his father, about the promise he'd made at the grave. Justice, not revenge. The right way, not the easy way. He was still awake when he heard horses approaching, many horses moving fast. Coulter grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. Ben emerged from the barn at the same time, shotgun ready. Aida appeared from the cabin, her knife drawn. But the riders weren't Drummond's men. They were Apache, at least 20 warriors led by Red Skywalker himself. They rode into the yard and dismounted, their faces grim. "What's wrong?" Coulter demanded. "Is it Sarah? Is Emily hurt?" "They are safe," Red Sky said. "But there is news from Prescott. The marshal sent a rider to find us." He paused, and something like anger flickered in his weathered face. "Silas Drummond has been arrested, but not for murder." "What?" Coulter felt confusion wash over him. "Then for what?" "For attempted bribery of a federal officer," Red Sky replied. "Marshal Carter says Drummond tried to pay him to drop the investigation, offered him $10,000. Carter arrested him on the spot." It should have been good news. Drummond in custody was better than Drummond free. But something about Red Sky's expression told Coulter there was more. "What else?" he asked. "Drummond posted bail within 2 hours," Red Sky said. "And now he has disappeared. The marshal's men cannot find him. He is gone like smoke on the wind." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Drummond was free, he knew the evidence against him, and he'd disappeared. Which meant only one thing: he was coming for them. "How much time do we have?" Coulter asked. "Not much," Red Sky replied. "Maybe hours, maybe less." Coulter looked around at his ranch, his home, the land his father had died to protect. Then he looked at Aida and Ben, at the Apache warriors who'd ridden through the night to warn him. "Then we prepare," he said simply. "If Drummond wants a fight, we'll give him one. But we do it smart. We do it together, and when it's over, he answers for what he did to my father." The warriors nodded, grim-faced and ready. Ben checked his shotgun. Aida touched the knife at her belt. And Coulter Hayes, the shy rancher who'd spent 3 years in quiet grief, felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Not revenge. Something cleaner than that: purpose. The storm was coming, and they would be ready. The sun was setting when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Coulter stood on the roof of his cabin rifle in hand, watching the approaching riders. He counted at least 15 men, maybe more. They moved at a steady pace, not rushing, confident in their numbers and their purpose. "They're coming from the west," he called down to the others, 15 riders heavily armed. Red Sky had positioned his warriors strategically around the ranch. Some were in the barn, others behind water troughs and fence posts, a few in the tall grass beyond the main buildings. They were invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them, ghosts waiting in the twilight. Aida climbed up the ladder to join Coulter on the roof. Her face was calm, but he could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "My grandfather says this is not the Apache way. We prefer to choose when and where we fight." "But you'll fight anyway," Coulter said. It wasn't a question. "Your father swore an oath to my people," Aida replied. "That oath extends to you now. We protect our own." Down below, Ben was checking his ammunition for the third time, nervous energy making him fidget. The 2 Apache warriors with him, Swift Arrow and an older man named Gray Wolf, waited with the patience of stones. The riders drew closer, close enough now that Coulter could make out individual faces. He recognized several from Pine Valley, hired guns drifters, men who'd sell their loyalty to whoever paid best. And at the front of the group, sitting tall on a black stallion, was Silas Drummond himself. "He came personally," Coulter said with grim satisfaction. "Didn't send his men to do the dirty work." "Because he wants to make sure it's done right this time," Aida observed. "He won't leave witnesses, won't leave evidence. He'll kill everyone here and burn the ranch to the ground." "Then he's going to be disappointed," Coulter said. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin just outside easy rifle range. Drummond dismounted with the ease of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. He was still dressed like a gentleman, expensive suit and polished boots, but he'd added a gun belt with 2 pearl-handled revolvers. "Hayes," Drummond's voice carried clearly in the still evening air. "I know you're in there. Come out. We need to talk." "We've got nothing to talk about, Drummond," Coulter called back. "The marshal has all the evidence he needs. You're finished." Drummond laughed, a sound without humor. "The marshal has paper. Papers can burn Hayes. Witnesses can disappear, and sons can die just like their fathers." The threat was explicit now, out in the open. No more civilized pretense, no more games. This was a man who'd come to kill and was confident enough to announce it. "You're making a mistake," Coulter said. "The marshal knows you're here. If anything happens to us, he'll know who did it." "Will he?" Drummond replied. "Carter is a good man, but he's practical. He'll find a way to explain it. Apache raiders, maybe. Bandits. These things happen on the frontier. Tragic, but unavoidable." One of Drummond's men leaned over and whispered something. Drummond nodded, then raised his voice again. "I know you're not alone, Hayes. I can see tracks everywhere. Apache ponies, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm guessing that old fool Red Sky Walker is out here somewhere with his warriors." He paused, letting that sink in. "That changes things. I came here prepared to deal with you and your friends. But if I have to fight Apache, this gets messy. People die. Maybe your people, maybe mine, probably both." "So what are you proposing?" Coulter asked, though he could guess. "A trade," Drummond said. "You give me the maps. Both of them, the one your father drew and the old Apache one. You give me the journal and the letters, all the evidence, and in return, I ride away. You live, the Apache live, everyone goes home." "Except justice doesn't get done," Coulter said. "Justice," Drummond's voice was mocking now. "Boy, there's no such thing as justice. There's only power. The strong take what they want, and the weak make excuses about fairness and law. Your father learned that lesson. I'm offering you the chance to be smarter than he was." Aida touched Coulter's arm, her eyes meeting his. "It's your choice," she said quietly. "My grandfather will support whatever you decide. If you want to trade the evidence for peace, we'll accept that." Coulter looked down at the leather satchel at his feet containing all the proof of Drummond's guilt. 3 years of grief, months of investigation, all condensed into a handful of papers and maps. He could give it up, walk away live, to see another sunrise, but his father's ghost would haunt him forever, and the silver mine would go to the man who'd murdered to get it. "No," Coulter said firmly. He raised his voice. "No deal, Drummond. You want these papers, you'll have to take them, and I don't think you're going to find that as easy as you imagine." For a moment there was only silence. Then Drummond's pleasant mask finally cracked completely. His face twisted with rage, and he drew one of his revolvers. "Then you die tonight," Drummond snarled. "All of you. And I'll pry those maps from your dead fingers." He turned to his men. "Burn them out. Kill anyone who moves." The gunmen spurred their horses forward, spreading out as they charged the ranch buildings. And that's when Red Sky's trap closed. The Apache warriors rose from their hiding places like ghosts materializing from the earth itself. Arrows flew silent and deadly. 3 of Drummond's men fell from their saddles before a single shot was fired. The rest wheeled their horses in confusion, suddenly realizing they'd ridden into an ambush. "Fire!" Coulter shouted. Ben's shotgun roared from the barn, and 2 more riders went down. Coulter aimed carefully and squeezed his trigger. A man clutched his shoulder and toppled sideways. Aida fired her own rifle, a gift from her grandfather, and another rider's horse reared and threw its rider. The attack dissolved into chaos. Drummond's men had expected an easy fight, 3 or 4 people they could overwhelm with numbers. Instead, they found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple positions facing warriors who'd been fighting in these lands since before their grandfathers were born. But Drummond's men were professionals, too. They recovered quickly, diving off their horses and taking cover behind whatever they could find. Return fire began, bullets thudding into wood and whistling overhead. A round punched through the cabin roof inches from Coulter's head. He dropped flat, pulling Aida down with him. "We need to get off this roof," he said. They scrambled to the ladder and climbed down. Inside the cabin, Coulter grabbed his father's rifle and extra ammunition. Through the window he could see muzzle flashes in the growing darkness. The battle had devolved into a siege, attackers and defenders trading fire across the ranch yard. "How many did we get?" Ben asked, reloading his shotgun with shaking hands. "Maybe 6 or 7, Coulter replied, "but there's still twice that many out there." A bullet shattered the window, showering them with glass. They dropped to the floor, crawling toward better positions. The cabin walls were thick logs, but they wouldn't stop sustained fire forever. "We need to break the siege," Aida said. "If we stay pinned down, they'll just wait until we run out of ammunition." She was right. Drummond could afford to be patient now. He had the numbers, and time was on his side. Eventually the defenders would run low on bullets or make a mistake. "The barn," Coulter said suddenly. "If we can reach the barn, we can flank them from 2 sides." "That's 30 yards of open ground," Ben pointed out. "They'll cut us down before we make it halfway." "Not if we have a distraction," Swift Arrow said. The young Apache warrior had moved silently into the cabin through the back door. "Gray Wolf and I will draw their fire. You run while they shoot at us." "That's suicide," Coulter protested. Swift Arrow smiled, his white teeth flashing in the darkness. "We are Apache. We do not die easily." Before Coulter could argue further, Swift Arrow was gone, slipping back out into the night. Seconds later, Coulter heard the distinctive war cry of the Apache, high and piercing, followed by the boom of rifles. "Now!" Aida shouted. They burst from the cabin door, running low and fast toward the barn. Coulter heard bullets cracking past his head, felt the hot breath of one pass so close it singed his hair. But Swift Arrow and Gray Wolf were doing their job, drawing fire from 3 different positions, giving the running figures barely enough distraction. They crashed through the barn door and dove behind hay bales. Ben was breathing hard, his face pale. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," he gasped. "Thought I was dead for sure." Coulter crawled to a gap between boards and peered out. He could see at least 4 gunmen taking cover behind water troughs and wagons. And beyond them, still mounted on his black stallion like some dark general, was Silas Drummond himself. "I'm going after him," Coulter said. "That's crazy," Ben protested. "You'll never make it." "I have to try," Coulter replied. "As long as Drummond lives, this doesn't end. He'll just hire more men, try again. The only way to stop this is to stop him." Aida grabbed his arm. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," Coulter said firmly. "I need you here. If I don't make it, you take the evidence to Carter. Make sure my father's death means something." For a moment, Aida looked like she might argue. Then she nodded understanding in her dark eyes. She leaned forward quickly and kissed him, her lips warm and soft against his. "Don't die, Cowboy." Coulter checked his Colt, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. Then he took a deep breath and slipped out the barn's side door into the shadows. The ranch yard was a nightmare of smoke and gunfire. Bodies lay scattered in the dirt, some moving, some still. Red Sky's warriors were holding their positions, but Coulter could see they were running low on arrows. Soon it would come down to knives and close combat. He moved from shadow to shadow, using every bit of cover, working his way around the edge of the battle. Drummond was still on his horse, directing his men, seemingly unconcerned about the danger. The man's arrogance was stunning. Coulter got within 20 yards before a guard spotted him. The man shouted and raised his rifle, but Coulter was faster. His Colt spoke once and the guard fell. But the damage was done. Now everyone knew he was there. Drummond wheeled his horse around his pearl-handled revolvers, coming up. The 2 men faced each other across the bloody dirt of the ranch yard, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. The gunfire became distant, the shouts and screams muffled. "You should have taken the deal," Drummond said. "You should have let my father live," Coulter replied. They fired simultaneously. Coulter felt something punch into his left side, a hammer blow that spun him halfway around, but he saw Drummond jerk in the saddle, saw blood blossom on the man's shoulder. Both men had scored hits. Drummond's horse reared, spooked by the gunfire. The rancher fought to control it with one hand while trying to aim with the other. Coulter raised his Colt again, fighting through the pain in his side. He had one chance, one shot to end this, but before he could fire, an arrow sprouted from Drummond's chest. The rancher looked down at it in shock, his revolvers falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. He swayed in the saddle, then toppled backward and fell heavily to the ground. Red Sky Walker stepped out of the shadows, his bow still raised. The old Apache elder walked slowly to where Drummond lay, gasping. "For my brother James Hayes," Red Sky said quietly, "for the oath he kept until death." Drummond tried to speak, but only blood came out. His eyes glazed over, and he was still. The ranch yard fell silent. Drummond's remaining men, seeing their leader dead, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. They wanted no part of a fight that was already lost. Coulter sank to his knees, his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, warm and wet. The world swam around him, growing dark at the edges. Then Aida was there, kneeling beside him, her hands examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "It's not too bad," she said, though her voice shook. "Went through clean, missed anything vital. Hurts like hell, though," Coulter managed. "You'll live," Aida said. And then more softly, "You have to live." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Mourning Dove and the other Apache women tended to the wounded. The dead were laid out with dignity, friend and foe alike. Ben and the Apache warriors tied up Drummond's surviving men and locked them in the barn under guard. Marshal Carter arrived with dawn, having ridden through the night, when one of Red Sky's runners reached him with news of the attack. He surveyed the carnage, his face grim. "Drummond?" he asked. "Dead," Coulter replied from where he sat, propped against the cabin wall, his torso wrapped in clean bandages. "Shot, resisting arrest, you might say." Carter looked at Red Sky Walker, at the Apache warriors, at the bodies scattered across the ranch yard. "This is going to require one hell of a report," he said finally. "But from what I can see, it was self-defense. Drummond and his men attacked you, defended your property." He looked directly at Coulter. "That's what my report will say. Anyone have a problem with that?" No one did. Carter's deputies took Drummond's surviving men into custody. They'd face charges for murder, attempted murder, arson, and a dozen other crimes. With their employer dead, most of them were eager to talk, hoping to save their own necks. The stories they told implicated Drummond in crimes stretching back years. 3 days later, Sarah Whitmore and Emily returned from the mountain camp. Sarah cried when she saw the damage to the ranch, the bullet holes, and burn marks. But she cried harder when Coulter told her it was over, that she and her daughter were safe now. "What will you do?" Coulter asked her. "The boarding house is yours, but—" "But I can't go back there," Sarah finished. "Too many memories, too much fear." She looked around at the ranch, at the wide open spaces. "Do you need help here? A cook, a housekeeper. Someone to manage things while you're recovering." Coulter thought about it. The ranch was big for one man, even with Ben's help, and Sarah needed a fresh start, a place where she could feel safe. "The job is yours if you want it," he said. "Room and board fair wages, and Emily can go to the school in Pine Valley when it opens next month." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Coulter had seen from her. "Then we'll stay. This feels like home already." A week after the battle, life at Red Mesa Ranch began to find its new rhythm. Sarah Whitmore proved to be an excellent cook and manager. She brought warmth to the cabin that Coulter hadn't felt since his mother died. Emily flourished in the open spaces, her laughter echoing across the ranch as she helped feed the chickens and learned to ride a gentle mare named Blossom. "Mama, can we really stay here forever?" Emily asked one morning, her red gold hair shining in the sun. "As long as Mr. Hayes will have us," Sarah replied, smiling. "Forever then," Coulter said firmly. "This is your home now." Ben Carter, for his part, surprised everyone by announcing he'd been sweet on the widow who ran the general store in Pine Valley. "Martha's agreed to marry me," Ben said, grinning like a fool. "Says she needs a man who knows how to use a shotgun and isn't afraid of hard work. I figure that's me." "About time," Coulter said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "You deserve happiness, Ben. You've earned it 10 times over." "We'll stay close," Ben promised. "Just down in town. I can still help out here when you need me." Red Sky Walker prepared to return to the mountain camp with his warriors. They'd helped repair the worst of the damage, mended fences, and patched bullet holes. Now it was time to go home. "The oath is fulfilled," Red Sky told Coulter. "Your father is avenged. The silver mine is yours to do with as you will. But remember the promise James Hayes made, that the wealth would be shared, used to help both our peoples." "I remember," Coulter said, "and I'll keep that promise. We'll use the silver to build schools, dig wells by medicine, for everyone, Apache and white alike." Red Sky placed his weathered hand on Coulter's shoulder. "You are your father's son. He would be proud." As the Apache prepared to leave, Aita lingered. She and Coulter stood by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mesa in shades of crimson and gold. "Will you stay?" Coulter asked. "Help me figure out how to keep my father's promise?" "For a while," Aita replied. "I have a story to write. About justice, about courage, about two peoples coming together. It deserves to be told properly. And after the story is written," Coulter pressed. Aita turned to face him, her dark eyes warm. "After, we'll see. I'm not good at staying in one place. I told you my name means first to dance. I'm always moving, always seeking." "Maybe you'll find what you're seeking here," Coulter suggested. "Maybe I already have," Aita said softly. She leaned up and kissed him again, longer this time, full of promise and possibility. When she pulled away, she smiled. "But don't expect me to make it easy, Cowboy. You'll have to work for it." "I'm a rancher," Coulter replied. "I'm used to hard work." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, two people from different worlds who'd found common ground. Around them, the land stretched wide and wild and free, full of possibility. The silver mine beneath the mesa would make them wealthy, but it was the promises they kept, the oaths they honored, that would make them whole. Coulter thought of his father, of James Hayes, who died keeping his word to people he considered brothers. And he made a silent vow that he would do the same, not for money, not for power, but because it was right. Because some things mattered more than silver. Things like honor and justice, and the bonds between people who chose to stand together against the darkness. The stars came out cold and clear in the desert sky, the same stars that had watched over his father and his father's father before him. That courage matters, that promises should be kept, and that sometimes, in the hardest of times, the right choice is also the only choice. Colter Hayes had learned that lesson well, and he would spend the rest of his life living it. The following month, Colter and Aita stood at the entrance to the hidden cave beneath the mesa. The silver veins ran through the rock like frozen lightning, just as Red Sky had described. "We could be rich," Aita said quietly, "richer than Drummond ever was." Colter was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on the ancient Apache pictographs carved into the stone. "My father made a promise," he said finally, "that this wealth would serve both peoples, so we'll do it carefully. Take only what we need for schools, wells, medicine, leave the rest for future generations who might need it more." "And if others learn about it?" Aita asked. "If more men like Drummond come looking?" Colter looked at the leather satchel containing both maps. Then, with deliberate care, he struck a match and held it to the papers. They watched as the maps curled and burned, the secrets turning to ash. "Let it stay hidden," Colter said. "Some treasures are worth more when they're protected than when they're spent." Aita smiled and took his hand. "Your father would be proud." They sealed the cave entrance with rocks, marking it with symbols only they and Red Sky's people would recognize. The silver would remain waiting for the day when it was truly needed, because some promises were meant to be kept for generations. The mesa called her name, and Aita Riverhawk answered, but she didn't answer alone. Together they would build something new, something that honored the past while looking toward the future. And that, in the end, was the best justice of all. The end.